Welcome to another episode of the ContinuousX podcast, where we try to solve for X in the SDLC equation. I have with me my co-host, Mike Fitzurka, and joining us today as our guest is Jamie Duncan, a Google customer engineer. Welcome, Jamie.
Hey, Rick, good to see you again, man.
Good to see you, pal. You know, we've seen your presentations explaining what containers are and how Kubernetes facilitates or amplifies their importance. But can you briefly explain to our audience how Kubernetes has been instrumental in unlocking the application's value and to its stakeholders and how it realizes the agency's mission?
Hey, it's a loaded question, right?
Yeah,
because you don't have to twist it too hard to find somebody that doesn't.
No,
especially in the government.
There's no softballs to you, Jamie.
Yeah, exactly. But so I think you can't talk about Kubernetes without talking about containers because they're part and parcel right now. Containers aren't the end state, but they're the current evolutionary state. There's some kid somewhere thinking up the thing after containers, and whether that kid's in Bangalore or Butte County Community College or MIT or wherever, there will be a thing after containers. But for now, like I talk about to lots of customers where you can really hang all of IT on this quest for better process isolation. And we've been trying to isolate processes since we've had processes to isolate, like from UNIVAC, where you ran one at a time, to mainframes, to client servers, to VMs, to containers. Containers are the smallest Legos we've got right now that do effective process isolation. So the biggest thing with them is, okay, now I've got something that is sub VM in size. So I don't have to boot a whole operating system to get my process isolation. That opened the door for us to say, okay, now I get to think about my application differently for the first time ever. Because with VMs, I did weird things inside the VMs where VM equaled app.
Yes.
Which meant I had to back up the whole VM, which meant my libraries got all commingled with the operating system, and suddenly I'm arguing with the ops guy over which version of Python to run and all that stuff. Those decades of sort of conspiratorial battle that we've designed dev and ops to be.
The war.
This conflict-laden relationship that we've built. Well, containers kind of let us tear a lot of that down. Mm-hmm. And that's the big benefit of them personally, is that now I don't have to trust the ops guy as a developer, and my ops guy doesn't have to trust the developer. I have to trust what they give me. And containers, for the first time, give me a binary object that I can go test. I can hook this container up to my battery, and I can confirm that it's good or not. I can cryptographically sign it. I can do all the things that I need to do to say, this little widget holds this app or this service, and it's okay to go. And as long as my OS, as long as the ops side of house will run that container, I don't care what's inside it, as long as it passes the tests. So if that developer who is secretly building their bespoke work of art, because every developer is secretly building their bespoke work of art, and they have to hard code their mother's maiden name into the data path and all that weird stuff that, as an old ops nerd, right, I ran into and yelled about and screamed about because you violated the file system hierarchy standard and blah, blah, and you broke SE Linux in the process. All of that stuff, we don't have to argue about it anymore. So that's what containers give us. Smaller building blocks, this sort of binary object that I can test against and verify is okay to go. But I can't orchestrate containers. A container is intrinsically tied to Linux. A container is just kernel tricks inside Linux. But I want to scale across clusters because I got used to that in VMs, because I could drop an F5 in front of a bunch of VMs and boom, I have a cluster. Kubernetes gives me that without the need for things outside. The people that invented it, and I have an interesting viewpoint, having learned about Kubernetes, but then getting inside the wall at Google, and seeing how Borg works.
The Borg.
And the Borg. And Kubernetes is very much, if Borg was designed to run outside Google, Kubernetes is the direction it would have gone. That's the best analogy. Borg is so completely tethered and is the beating heart of all of the infrastructure inside Google. You couldn't pull it out. Like running Borg outside of Google is like trying to say you're going to rip my heart out and it's going to work properly, on a skateboard rolling down the street. It just can't be that way. We can't violate the laws of physics. But Kubernetes is that idea of scaling things. And the thing they decided to scale was containers because that was the most effective process isolation that was available at the time. So what does it do? Like, why is it a good thing? What does it enable? How does it make things better? For the first time, and we've been shooting for this since I had hair and your hair wasn't gray. We've been trying to give the operations side of house something to code against forever. And there are millions of failed attempts. Like the whole VMware exploded on that promise. Everything that tried to take out VMware exploded on that promise. Puppet, Chef, CF Engine, Ansible, Terraform, every automation process tool, everything that is running inside almost every data center, monitoring tools, observability, all of it is this promise that we can find your infrastructure, interrogate it, and act on it. None of it works. None of it works properly, and none of it doesn't work without massive amounts of care and feeding. Now, we can say Kubernetes is hard or Kubernetes is easy. What Kubernetes gives us is a single API that I can talk to every stage of my application for. I can talk about its storage. I can talk about its network. I can talk about its compute and its RAM. I can talk about what the actual app payload is. I can talk about its routing. I can talk about everything my application needs to be to do its job. I can talk about it to one API. That's what Kubernetes gives us. So my ops team now has to understand one language. And yes, it's YAML. And yes, it's talking to the RESTful API that is the Kube API server. But it's one language. Whereas in a VM-based world, I get to talk VMware. I get to talk hardware. I get to talk my monitoring system. I get to talk Splunk. I get to talk the 14 other things. And nobody can do them all well. So we have big, giant, gaping security holes. So the honest to God benefit, and I'm lucky enough that I've gotten to talk to some of the people that invented Kubernetes, like Craig McCluskey and Joe Beda and all those, those big brains. We kind of, the hype train kind of beat up Kubernetes a little bit. It's like you have all these people like Golang is the coolest language ever and blah, blah, blah. The code base that is Kubernetes is the least important part of Kubernetes.
Yeah, right.
It is designed to evolve. The thing that's important about Kubernetes is the idea that give me one API to talk to and I can manage all of my infrastructure through it. That's it. That's where, when you get that in your head, and you're like, okay, now I get to lay down all these rocks that I've been carrying for so long and speak this one thing and eliminate 5, 6, 7, 8 tools. Like I tell customers all the time, if something doesn't save you time, it's not going to save you money.
Right.
Like it's a complete truth in our industry, and there are very few of those. Kubernetes, at the end of the day, especially when you start looking at some of the managed services out there, where you're not rolling your own and reading change logs constantly, saves you time, which means it saves you money. Because now your people are going to solve more meaningful problems, not keeping the lights on.
That's the money shot, in my opinion, Jamie, is people are focused on their agency's mission as opposed to how they're going to accomplish it.
You're exactly right. I had years ago, before I started at Red Hat, so we're talking 2011 plus or minus, I worked for this little startup in Bethesda. They were a bioinformatics company, and the CTO was super smart. Maybe not the world's best CTO, but an incredibly bright person. And maybe he was the world's best CTO. I was, young and stupid.
Well, if you're quoting him, he might be.
Yeah. Well, he had this one angle that anything you did, you had to be prepared to justify the work in the point of view of the end user.
Interesting.
And I don't care if it was buying laptop parts for the scientists or the developers. You had to you didn't have to, you didn't have to put it in a Jira ticket.
Right.
But that point of view was the pervasive point of view for everything ops did. How is this going to affect the end user? How is this going to make the end user's experience better? And I keep that in the back of my head all the time. And that empathetic point of view, where I'm not beholden to it and I'm not, hell bent on dollar signs, but how's it going to make the point of view better? I honestly think Kubernetes probably has the biggest ROI to end users that they don't know about.
Huh.
I mean, you got to kind of two-hop it to get there. But if a company, if a group or a team or a whoever, an agency, a 3-letter org, all the way down to a 2-pizza team, if they're doing Kubernetes effectively, which means if they're doing container orchestration effectively, they have freed up so many cycles to go solve other problems that their team almost has to be performing well.
Interesting.
Because they're not fighting on. Now, I'm not saying getting from zero to Kubernetes effectively is not fraught with peril and pain. It is graduate level IT. Like we talk about 100, 200. This is 500 plus level IT. We're talking about abstracting an entire platform into a single API. The hard thing to wrap your head around. Once you get there, the amount of savings you can realize is phenomenal.
We decided to end this episode here, but please join us for the next episode with Jamie to discuss the potential downsides with Kubernetes as we strive to solve for X in the SDLC equation.